260. Is it 2 or 3?
262, and then that was, again, you never know how these statistics, add as players get brought up, as the season goes on.
Right, but the 262 pairs of fathers and sons have played together in Major League
Well, they didn't play together.
Well, played Major League Baseball together.
Right, very few
There's
of
a
them
very,
played
very,
together.
and I think it's kind of interesting when you look at fathers and sons playing baseball. I think that to me is the peak. Obviously, the father and the son both playing Major League Baseball together, and that's a very, very limited list of guys that have ever gotten to enjoy that. I think it might be like 1 or 2 people on that list altogether, like one or two pairs.
That's a good question. I
Besides the Griffeys, I can't think of anybody.
Comes to mind.
We couldn't find. I couldn't find anybody when I was looking.
It makes me think of LeBron wanting to play with his son and how strong that pull is, in basketball.
So I just think it's interesting because you hold up them as sort of like, that's what you would want. If you were thinking about playing father and son playing them in the major leagues, you think about them doing them together. And I think that's why you kind of like, if you take a step back with that, you're saying that's like the most elevated level of it. I think then the baseball families like the Alous, like the Alomars, like the Bells, like the Boones, there's something to be said for such a strong tradition of a family baseball, of baseball in a family, that extends not just from father to son, but to grandson sometimes even.
And here's the thing they never get to do. If you're a father and or a son and you play professional baseball, you never get to spend Father's Day together.
No.
Because you're always playing a game. In fact, if your dad played and then you go and play, you really haven't spent
really never. I mean, unless you're spending time together at the ballpark.
So there are more Hall of Fame dads whose sons played in the major leagues by a long way.
Correct.
Then there are sons who made the Hall of Fame whose dad didn't.
Right. Just to give a comparison, there's only 2 sons whose father were a major league player that then ended up going on to make the Hall of Fame. There are no fathers and sons who both have made the Hall of Fame. While there's two sons, which are Roberto Alomar and Ken Griffey Jr. They both made the Hall of Fame. Ken Griffey Sr. and Sandy Alomar. Not Sandy Alomar Jr.
Right. Who's also his brother.
Who's his brother. Did not make the Hall of Fame. But there are 14 dads in the MLB Hall of Fame, which is kind of impressive, and that's a lot of guys.
And I would think that, we've done enough of these podcasts. You would know all the players we're going to talk about that are these 14 Hall of Fame, even if they played a long time ago.
I don't know Earl Averill.
Earl Averill played for the Cleveland then Indians. I can say that if I do it in that way, and was a terrific hitter, outfielder on some very good Cleveland teams. And I did not know that his son played Major League Baseball because
I didn't know I didn't know Yogi Berra's son played Major League Baseball.
Well, Yogi Berra's son, notable because I think he had at least 2 sons, and I think Tim Berra tried to play professional baseball and didn't make it. His other son, Dale Berra, did play, and Dale Berra was unfortunately notable for getting into trouble with drugs back in the 80s, and not only almost got kicked out of baseball for it, but he almost got kicked out of the family, as Yogi threatened him one day saying, "You can't come home unless you change who you are."
And he was not making the joke that he needed to change his name to Boo Boo.
Exactly. So that's unfortunately for Dale, but Dale is cool now, and it all came around in a really good way. Right. So we're happy about that.
Eddie Collins is a Hall of Famer. We've talked about him a few different times here on this program.
Oh yeah, and I didn't know much about his son. We skipped over Craig Biggio,
right? And his son Cavan is in the major leagues right now, though he just got traded, I believe, to the Cubs.
Well, first he was DFA'd,
right, and then
the Dodgers ended up picking him up.
Snapped him up.
Yeah, so he's still playing Major League Baseball. So that we made it through that one, and then the one probably one of the best chances for a father and a son to make it into the Hall of Fame still kind of exists, would you say?
Well, with Vlad, you have
Vlad Sr.
and Cavan Biggio's once teammate in Vlad Guerrero Jr. Interesting that there's going to be 3 guys that we end up talking about that were all on this Toronto team. Vlad Sr. and Vlad Jr. probably are right now the closest to it.
I'd say so.
Probably the closest since the Griffeys.
Right. I'd say that's true. And then you mentioned Eddie Collins. Tony Gwynn and his son Tony Gwynn Jr. was not the player that his dad was, but is a really interesting guy to listen to.
I gotta think it's gotta be terrible learning baseball from Tony Gwynn because he's just gonna be just hit the ball. You just hit the ball. He just did it for you hit the ball and you don't strike out. It's gotta be really hard to take tips from somebody that was just such a good hitter like that.
Freddie Lindstrom, who was a terrific Hall of Famer for the Giants, and I think in the New York Giants, his son was not the player that he was. Connie Mack. So you forget sometimes Connie Mack. All I ever think about when I think about Connie Mack is wearing like a bowler and a suit, and he's really tall.
You think of him as a manager.
53 years as a manager. I don't even think of him as a player, and would not know. There's a lot of guys with the name Mack, but I don't know who the heck Connie Mack's son was who played Major League Baseball.
And then there was a guy named Jim O'Rourke.
Jim O'Rourke was I think late 19th century player. Made it leaked into the early 20th century.
I'm going to say this. Here's how
great player.
But here's how you know that he was a late 19th century player is that his son was named Queenie O'Rourke.
Yeah,
and I'm pretty sure there's nobody in modern days that's naming their son Queenie.
That's not a nice thing to do. Or maybe it was a nickname, or I don't know. It's just it's something you wouldn't do to a person
that's how
that you
know
loved.
it's from back in the day.
I hopefully his parents didn't do that, because that's not showing a whole lot of love. Tony Perez and his son Eduardo, who had a nice major league career, but not his
more
dad's.
known as a broadcaster than anything else. At this
And he'd be
point.
the first to tell you that, by the way, Eduardo, that Tony is the man. Tim Raines Sr. and Tim Raines Jr. Well, we know about Tim Raines Sr. I think I've seen Tim Raines Jr. I remember when he was playing, but
he was not the player
long.
his father was. I did not know also that Ivan Rodriguez's kid.
I think it's Ivan Rodriguez Jr. And he had a very forgettable, professional career because he didn't make it very long. George Slisler had two brothers who played. Two sons.
Oh, okay.
I think he had a brother who played also. He had two sons who played, not notably in the major leagues.
And then the last guy is a guy named Ed Walsh Sr.
So talk about a name, that is just such a plain name. But Ed Walsh was an amazing pitcher. The problem is that he pitched at the beginning of the 20th century, and so we tend to sort of not. We're going to do more of this and talk about this. That's not funny baseball now. But this is real baseball.
It is very interesting when we look at you have all of these guys, and I really can't think of a baseball period that's less understood than that time period. I mean, even our nickname here of it, calling it funny baseball, is sort of a play on the idea that you really don't. It feels like baseball history kind of gets started with Babe Ruth. Like, that's kind of when the narratives and everything sort of coalesce.
That's interesting. That's interesting. Form. That modern baseball history, so not 1901, like 1912 or whenever Ruth came out.
Walter Johnson was a pitcher back then. There were guys that were good playing before Ruth came, because I think even the White Sox scandal,
Christy Mathewson,
happened before.
That was 1919.
Right, that really happened before Ruth ascended into superstardom. Right,
that's true. That's true. That was just about the time when he made his mark.
But all of that time period is, outside of knowing the couple major players like Ty Cobb, we really don't know a lot about the era. So if you weren't somebody that was a larger than life persona, you kind of get lost to time if you're from that era.
So Ed Walsh, you don't think of a guy who won the ERA title in 1908, and he had two championships. The first with the White Sox, and then with the A's, and he had two strikeout championships. But there's a guy you just don't really hear of, even though he's in the Hall of Fame, and he had the lowest career earned run average when he retired.
Right, so he still has that. He's number one. He was not elected by the baseball.
Because he retired so young. They didn't,
They didn't have the.
He was one of those first guys to get in.
Right, exactly.
And so those are the guys. The sons of
those are the Hall of Fame.
The Hall of Fame dads whose sons made it in there. So there's 14 of those guys. I would say that if you tried to look at the top guys of all time.
I think the tough thing about the top guys of all time is that once you get past like the top 2 or 3, it's mostly one really good player and then his son or father also played in the major leagues. Because like when we go up to the top and you look at the number one is obviously the Bonds. If you're going by WAR, if we're saying who produced the most WAR cumulatively between father and son, it's going to be Barry and Bobby, because Barry produced an absolute ton of WAR, and Bobby was a really good player too.
Right, and we were talking about off air about Bobby Bonds, and I was fortunate enough to see him play a good part of his career. He actually played for the Yankees in addition to really being more of a San Francisco Giant than anything else. But Bobby Bonds, who has 300 career home runs and over 300 steals,
over 450 steals.
Right, one of the few guys to do that. What he did at that time that was frowned upon was he struck out a lot. He would lead Barry's dad, the league, unlike his dad, right? He would lead the league in strikeouts each season for at least a few years, 3 or 4 years.
He's one of only 8 guys to ever be in the 300 home runs, 300 steals club, and he was almost established the 40-40 club when he missed it by like one home run.
I think like a 39-43 season. I think. I even remember that.
That was in '73, and he led the NL in runs and total bases that year. So I mean, he put up 57.7 WAR for his career. So he was the problem is, when you're comparing him against his son put up 162 WAR.
Right. Well, not comparing him in that way,
We're
but
just talking about them together.
Right. He I think was hurt by the fact that, well, everybody thought, well, yeah, he hits for power and speed and is great, but he strikes out too much. At a time when you couldn't do that.
Well, it's just
if he was playing today, he was ahead of his time.
Oh, ahead of his time.
he'd be a player today.
I'm just bringing up WAR because if you're talking about father and son's combined WAR, the issue is if you're doing combined WAR, the Bonds are number one because Barry by himself beats out everybody on the list.
I think that's true. Even if you add up all the Boones, right away. Right?
Right. Well, if you add up Ken Griffey and Ken Griffey Sr., he beats them by about 50.
Wow, that would probably be my second. Like if I thought, well, who else would be up there in all time?
Felipe and Moises by almost 100.
Yeah.
Like it's not even close when you get to some of these other guys. Not because they were bad. They just, Barry is in a league of his own when it comes to that.
And he gets the advantage, right? That the Bonds, this disadvantage when you talk about guys like the Bells, Gus Bell being Buddy Bell, David Bell, Mike. Well, you got four guys there. They still can't approach the
They
WAR.
still can't approach
those
him.
guys.
Or the Alomars still can't approach him.
Right, and you're talking about a Hall of Fame player in there whose father was a good ball player, right? He was not a Scribini or whatnot. Dizzy Trout and Steve Trout, I don't even know why they're on this list because Dizzy Trout was the player there. Steve Trout was,
I mean, he put together a 10-year major league season, and he had a decent year. He had a 13-7 year pitching in '83. So he at least put together, there's some guys because we look at some of the guys that are playing right now. Luis Garcia Jr. is the current starting second baseman for the Washington Nationals. His father, Luis Garcia, also played in the major leagues, but he got 9 at bats. That's kind of how you have to look at some of these guys. Like he at least put together, a major league career and played for a bunch of seasons.
Right.
Mike Bell, David's brother and Buddy's son, played 19 games in the major leagues. That's kind of a big difference.
That's close to a cup of coffee. We'll talk about a couple of guys like that. I'm also always thinking when I think father and son of the fielders, right? And I remember when Cecil Fielder was with the Tigers and he hit 50 home runs one year. It didn't happen that much in those days. And his son being in the locker room I think Prince was taking batting practice at Tiger Stadium. He was like 12 and hitting bombs, out of the ballpark. Going, this guy's 12 years old. He's hitting home runs. That's crazy.
And they were
they had a very good, career. It's just that Cecil was a one-dimensional player, and Prince was a 1.5-dimensional player.
They're very large one-dimensional players.
That's what I'm trying to say. Right. So, but they certainly don't approach. Jose Cruz and Jose Cruz Jr. I just love Jose Cruz when he was playing because that was before people did stuff like Cruz in the line in the crowd, and that was really fun. Every time he did something, good to hear that, unless he was playing my team, which happened too much.
I mean, Jose Cruz has his number retired by the Astros. I think a lot of people would realize that.
Right.
And his son was a very, very hot prospect that never kind of blossomed into his talent. Right.
Didn't quite pan out. Mel Stoudemire, the late Mel Stoudemire, and his son Todd, who's got some really interesting social media out there, by the way. I liked Todd's vibe or whatnot. Mel was a fine pitcher. Todd was a decent pitcher who pitched a long time, like you say, in the major leagues.
I think that counts for something, when we look at these father and son combos, because I have to give so much more to the guys that actually stuck around in the league for a number of seasons, as opposed to the guys that kind of just passed through it. There's something more to that. Though I think the most interesting thing when you talk about the Trouts, just go back to them for a second, was that Dizzy played from 1939 to 1952. Then didn't play for 5 years before just randomly coming back for a single game in 1957.
That happens way too much in baseball. When we go around, we look at some of these players, and a guy who I wrote something on, Lefty O'Doul, also came up as a pitcher back with the Giants and left Major League Baseball for 5 years before he came back as a hitter, even though he was a pitcher before that, which I think is interesting. This season we had 19
make the opening day 19
Big League
Sons.
Sons made the opener, and that doesn't include
Jack Leiter
Jack
Jr.
Leiter, not Jack Leiter Jr., Jack Leiter,
Leiter.
son of Al Leiter. You know all the players, though, right?
Right, yeah. We all know Cody Bellinger, though I think not everybody knows that his father, Clay Bellinger,
Was a Yankee outfielder who played a season or so in the major leagues.
Right, now we've already mentioned him with Luis Garcia, who is the son of Luis Garcia. And then I think you get to obviously the most intriguing kind of team that's on this, because you had the Toronto Blue Jays, who had Bo Bichette, Kevin Biggio, though who is now on the Dodgers, and Vlad Guerrero Jr., two of which are sons of Hall of Famers.
And two of which are better than their dad, I would say, right? I would say Bo Bichette is even though Dante Bichette had that one season.
I'd say Bo is probably going to end up a better player than his father. I don't know if I could say that about Kevin or Vlad Jr.
No, not about Vlad Jr. You're right, not about Vlad Jr. And Kevin, I think, is not going to be a Hall of Famer. So
no, Kevin's struggling to stay in the major leagues right now.
You're right. So it's only because Dante Bichette wasn't that good that his son is out.
And that's more of a function. I mean, Dante Bichette put up like a 6 offensive WAR season one year and still had a negative WAR just because of how bad he was.
Got to live that down every time. But he had some good offensive.
I would
seasons
totally
in
take it
Colorado.
if I could still brag about hitting 300s
and 40 homers too. Bryce Durang of the Brewers, and I'm aware of him playing. Obviously, he's playing this season and doing okay. Brian Turang, it's like I had heard the name.
I would have not known
Didn't do anything.
Why would you think they were father and son? They have different last names. That just throws you.
Oh, because they spelled it wrong.
Right.
So he wasn't quite the player. You mentioned Luis Garcia, and you have to make sure you get the right Luis Garcia.
Because there's
a lot of guys named Luis Garcia who played
yeah.
professional baseball.
I didn't know Brian Hayes' father was a major leaguer.
So Charlie Hayes, and I remember him as a Philly. I remember him, I think, late in his career, he went to the Giants, but he also played for the Yankees and was the guy who caught the ball at third base to win the 1996 World Series for the Yankees, and the Yankees won that first of what was 4 out of 5.
That's got to be
World
so
Series.
interesting, being the guy that catches the last
Oh, yeah.
out of a World Series.
Particularly in New York. If you do that, it's going to be shown to 8 million people who live here all the time. Cleon Jones going down on one knee,
yeah.
All that kind of stuff.
Over and over.
So, Cabrian is... but Cabrian, I think, has a pretty good chance of having a better career than did his old man.
Mm-hmm.
Bryce Jarvis and Kevin Jarvis of the Diamondbacks.
The most I can say about them, unfortunately, is there are 2 guys named Jarvis.
Mark Leiter Jr., we mentioned, on the Cubs. And,
who is not the son of Al Leiter,
That's
as
right.
a lot of people would think. It's his brother, right? Mark Leiter.
Right. He is the uncle of Jack. Actually, his father is Jack Leiter's uncle.
Yes.
So Al and Mark Sr. are brothers. And Hobie Milner of Milwaukee again, and Brian Milner had a short major league career.
I would have expected those names to be switched. It's kind of hard for you to believe there's a current
Guy
major
named
league
Hobie?
guy named Hobie.
I went to college with a guy named Hobie. He ended up playing football for SC and played for the New Orleans Saints. Hobie Brenner, good
that's cool.
player. Really had a nice career. Jock Peterson, and just a player that I guess he's always on the opposition and is very pesky. He's had a decent major league career.
Right, he's had a decent major league career.
Did not know that his dad, Stu Peterson, was a major league ball player.
I only kind of knew that because they talk about it a bunch, like whenever the Diamondbacks are on ESPN.
And Stu Peterson, basically played 8 games and had 5 plate appearances in the major leagues. So to call it a major league career is a
compliment.
Is true. Is what that is. It's true. I didn't know that Geronimo Pena, who I remember playing, who had a decent few years, is the father of Jeremy Pena of the Astros.
World Series MVP.
Yeah, in his rookie year, mind you. So that's a pretty good combo. Paul Quantrill, the father of Cal Quantrill, and I would say that Paul has had the better major league career because Cal's a guy who you keep thinking is going to turn a corner.
And he never kind of does.
And he never really does. Gavin Sheets, son of Larry Sheets, I had to go look and see because there was a guy named Ben Sheets, but they're not related.
Connected. The only reason we remember Ben Sheets was because he won that gold Olympic medal and then came into the majors after that and was pretty effective. So it was an unusual story because that was at a time where we didn't send our best players. Like, wait, how did we miss this guy?
Larry Sheets had a fairly forgettable major league career, but he did have a son who has had a pretty good career so far. Fernando Tatis Jr., well, there's one right there, right? Because he's already superseded his dad's career, Fernando Tatis. And so if you had to say one thing about Fernando Tatis Sr., and you could think about what's notable about his baseball
But he hit 2 grand slams in an inning.
I think he Right. He was 2 grand slams in an inning. It wasn't 4 home runs in a game.
No, maybe he did that.
I think he did that
but
too.
it's more for the 2 grand slams in an inning.
So,
and he's also the Padres' part-time hitting coach because they brought him in recently to try and help Fernando with his swing, and apparently he was the one that talked to Profar before the season and helped him out.
Well, that's working out so far.
Well, they're saying, why don't they bring him in as the hitting coach? It's like, because you can't piss off Junior when you have to fire his dad one day.
That's a good point. Dalton Varsho in Toronto now.
Having a fantastic season.
Great pickup for the Blue Jays. I remember when his dad, Gary, played, and only because Gary, I think, played for the Cubs, so I might have seen him a couple times when they came in and played the Mets. Dad was not a great baseball player in the major leagues, but his son looks like he's got a chance for some greatness. Ryan Weathers now on the injured list for the Marlins. Son of David Weathers, who was a good major league reliever.
Pitcher. Right,
Yep,
he was a closer for a little bit.
Yep, a closer, played for the Braves, so I'd say he's had the better career so far.
And then we get to the last guy on this list, current starting and likely all-star game shortstop.
Over Gunnar Henderson?
I mean, the season Bobby Witt Jr. is putting out this year is pretty unbelievable.
Fans are going to vote Gunnar in there, and Bobby's going to be a backup. That's what I think. But his dad, Bobby Witt Sr., who was just Bobby Witt, actually, didn't call him senior until he had a son, came up as like a big-time prospect pitcher for, I think, Oakland. And he's got 142 major league victories, 157 losses, and was a guy who couldn't find the plate a lot, but pitched a long time in Major League Baseball. So he had I guess a long major league career and better than average. The combination of the two of them will not approach, no matter how much Bobby Witt Jr. does, Barry Bonds and his dad.
No, but Bobby Witt, only just the thing, the guy's batting .330 with a 163 OPS plus this season. He's already got 4 WAR.
It'll be hard for him to sustain that for the rest of the season.
If he played like this the rest of the season, and you know what? It's his birthday today.
Oh, okay. Well, this is before Father's Day we're recording.
Right, yeah. Today is the 14th. It is Bobby Witt's birthday today.
So he's gonna. That was a nice gift for his dad, right on Father's Day when that happened all those years ago. So if you had to pick a starting lineup, I
mean, if you put it together, it's actually pretty good because when you start thinking about it, you go, okay, well, I put Bobby Witt at short. I put Cody Bellinger in center and Fernando Tatis Jr. in right and Vlad Guerrero at first base. And I'm like, all right, that's a pretty good 1, 2, 3, 4 for my lineup right there. I'll take that. And then you just start kind of plugging in holes. You're like, okay, well, Dalton Varsho can be my catcher.
Yeah, Cabrian Hayes at third, Jackson Holiday, who's had a rough start to the season, but there's no denying the talent.
The talent, right? We all think he'll end up, and then you've got Bo Bichette probably as your DH.
That's a pretty
and Cabrian Hayes at third. Yeah, you got a little team there, and then you have guys like Tyler Soderstrom, who's the
son of Steve. So I had to look up Steve Soderstrom because so Steve Soderstrom played 3 major league games. He started 2. There's a pitcher, obviously. Started 3 games. Won 2 of them. Never played in Major League Baseball again.
Not because of injury.
I don't know. So I started, you start going down a rabbit hole. You start looking up this guy. I can't find anything about this guy's career as to why he would come in and be, I guess when you win 2 out of your first 3 starts, you'd think that'd be a reason to keep pitching. And then for him never to pitch in Major League Baseball again, going to have to do a little more digging on Steve
what happened to him? Because that's it's an unusual thing. What happened, why he kind of just vanished off the face of the earth. Because he started all 3 games, got 2-0, gave up 16 hits in 13 and a half innings, had an ERA of 5.27.
Right, and said, nah, you're not good enough.
And just
disappeared, never to be heard from him. So his son is a young player who, has as the cliche is, his whole career in front of him. And the other guys on the bench, we mentioned Biggio and Gavin Sheets and Bryce Terang. This is a pretty good team of sons.
And then there's some guys in the minor leagues that I think you're going to kind of see coming up here soon enough. You're going to have a guy like Chad Wallach, some of Tim Wallach, and you've mentioned Tim Wallach before.
Tim Wallach was a stud player. Really, really good baseball player. Killed the Mets when he was with the Expos all those years. I think he ended up on the Dodgers late in his career.
I've seen Cody Clemens playing.
Yeah, salute. And he also killed the Mets. Right.
Series. Now, unfortunately for Cody, it's going to be tough to be as good as his father.
Yeah, I think he would just like to have a nice, long major league career.
We've been seeing Nick Gordon play recently in the series. The Mets.
Yeah, I didn't realize he's been around for a while too.
Son of Flash.
Yeah. I didn't realize it because isn't D. Gordon another one of his sons who's no longer playing Major League Baseball? I believe. So Nick's a 10-year major leaguer, if I'm not mistaken. Mike Cameron's son, Daz. There's another guy who hit 4 home
No,
runs
Nick's
in a
only
game.
been in the majors for a few years.
Oh, okay. There was a Nick. Maybe it's a different Nick Gordon I'm thinking
yes.
of.
Nick debuted a couple years ago.
Okay. There's another one who's 10 years. I think he was drafted in 2014.
That might have been D.
Yeah, no, it was Nick.
Okay.
It might have been just not his kid.
Yeah.
And Mike Cameron, who also hit 4 home runs in a game. His son Daz is trying to make it to the major leagues. Dalton Guthrie's son of Mark Guthrie, a good left-handed pitcher. And Connor Capel, we've heard about him in the Reds organization, son of Mike Capel. I have no idea who that is.
I don't know who either of those people are.
So, yeah.
There's just a lot of them. It's impressive when you start really going through the list. You can find the list online in terms of every major league pairing of fathers and sons that played, and it is expansive.
Right, and when you start they had in this Bleacher Report article that we pulled up, what they did is they kind of had honorable mentions because they had all these other guys who are like, oh yeah, I remember that guy. Oh, his dad played Major League Baseball.
I didn't know
too.
that.
So Tony Armas, I remember Tony Armas as a good player for the A's. Tony Armas Jr., we've heard him. Jim Bagby pitched back in the 60s, and his son Junior pitched in the major leagues. Brian Bannister, I remember, pitched for the Mets, son of Chicago White Sox pitcher, I think in Seattle, Floyd Bannister. Jeff Burrows, who won the home run title and I think an MVP back in the 1970s. Wow. His son Sean, who I believe was on a World Championship Little League team when he was a kid. I remember his dad was like a coach on the team, and there was Sean, and his dad was one of the coaches. And then Sean has made it all the way to the major leagues.
That's cool.
I think that's cool. Doug Drabeck and his son Kyle. Doug was a real good pitcher. His son
Drabeck was very good.
Right. There's Flash Gordon and his son D. Tom Grieve, who now is, I think was an owner of the Rangers for a long time, and Ben Grieve, yeah. So those two guys, the Hundleys.
Yes, yeah. People forget
both catchers.
People forget Todd Hundley's father played. Richard? What's his father's
Randy
name?
Randy Hundley, and he was on the '69 Cub team that the Mets overtook.
Wow.
And Todd also I saw later in his career ended up going and playing for the Cubs, which kind of made sense. Like he played for the Mets and he went to the Dodgers, but he had to play those 2 years for the Cubs because his dad was a Cub.
Exactly. Then he could finish out his career. He played for the same team as dad did.
So, and his dad was a very good player and very well respected. Fred Kendall and his son Jason Kendall was
a very good player.
fine
Though when you look at his career stats, you're like, oh, he's not even a Hall of Very good guy.
Right. Dave LaRoche.
Adam?
And Adam LaRoche, and that's a pretty good combination.
What about Drake LaRoche?
No.
That was such a goofy bit of drama.
Yes. Vernon Vance Law. Vern Law actually was a fine pitcher for the Pittsburgh Pirates. Vance Law was a catcher. I think he was a catcher. I'm not 100% sure of that. Gary Matthews and Gary Matthews Jr. Gary Matthews I think he was the guy that said 2/3 of the earth is covered by water, the other third by Gary Matthews. Out in center field there. I always get confused with Gary Maddox and Gary Matz. I'm pretty sure that was Gary Matthews, though. John Mayberry and John Mayberry Jr. I think you've seen Mayberry Jr. play.
He played for the Mets.
Yep. Hal McRae and Brian McRae. And you see that clip of Hal McRae, if you want to look it up sometime on YouTube, Hal McRae breaking up a double play
where he just
against
literally
the Reds.
runs.
He pushes the guy into left field. I mean, he drills him like a linebacker taking a quarterback out.
Right, and
it's like, that's the way we played the game then, pal.
Yeah, and that's why we're very glad to get
Hal
rid of
McRae
those
was a good
plays.
ball player, though, for the Kansas City.
He was playing it the right way.
Yep. Jeff Russell, I remember as a Dodger. James Russell, I don't remember. Steve Swisher and Nick Swisher. Steve Swisher came
and
up the
Nick was a decent player
yes,
for a
he
number
was.
of seasons.
Yes, he was. Andy Van Slyke, I really like this player. He was a player for the Pittsburgh Pirates and the St. Louis Cardinals. Scott Van Slyke, I don't know, so I'd have to look him up. I didn't get to that. The Eric Young combo, both of them had decent careers.
You had Tom Walker and Neil Walker. Neil Walker was a second baseman for the Mets and the Pirates.
And Neil Walker played for the Mets, like you said. And I remember the Mets saying, his dad played Major League Baseball. Tom Walker, never heard of the guy.
I think the name was just too generic.
I heard of Harry the Hat Walker. He was a fine manager and
my
player.
guess is that they Googled him and they got the Scottish songwriter Tom Walker. So they probably just never figured out that his dad was also a Major League Baseball player.
Current player Darryl Ward. Oh no, Darryl Ward's out of majors now.
Tyler.
Tyler, I'm thinking of, right. Gary Ward and Darrell Ward, these are, they're long not playing. Maury Wills, stolen base champion, and his son Bump, who came up in the 70s as a heralded prospect, and it never really worked out.
And much like
Bump
his
Wills,
name, his career was but a speed bump.
Kaboom. And Clyde Wright and his son Jarrett Wright, and I don't know, Jarrett Wright
No.
had a...
Just to clarify, his name is Jarrett, not Jared.
Jarrett, right. And
it's Jaret.
And Jarrett, that's interesting because there was a Jamie Wright who
Yes.
also pitched. I thought that was his brother, but obviously they're not listing him as the son of Clyde Wright, who was a longtime pitcher in the major leagues. And Jarrett Wright, I think, started a World Series game.
Jarrett Wright pitched a number of seasons for the
a-
Indians. I don't know if he ever pitched a World Series game.
I'm sure he started.
Unless it was for the Angels.
I had I thought it was him. It wasn't Jamie Wright who started that World Series game, was it? Anyway, one of these guys now did that at one point. So look, I feel for the fathers and sons who play baseball only in that they don't get to spend Father's Day together like we do. So that's a benefit to having us do this together. And we're still hoping to get some fathers and sons on our podcast.
That'd be really cool.
I've invited the Lighters to come on and talk about do they watch baseball together and what's it like when they watch baseball. Could you imagine sitting there and there's Mark, Uncle Mark is there, and there's Al and Jack is there.
Jack and Mark.
Jr. Let's watch a game. What do you think?
I can't imagine they do that often.
I guess they probably the women in the family are going, really? Really, you're going to watch baseball? Isn't it enough?
There's got to be something better we can do.
To all the dads out there,
Happy Father's Day. Baseball has always been something to me, a sport more than any other sport that has passed down in generations. I think just because there's no sport as easy that you could just go in the backyard and have a catch. So I think your fathers and sons is connected to baseball in a way I think really no other major sport has. And I think that makes it really special.
Happy Father's Day. Hope you guys had a good one.